2001. My name is Charlie Henson. We're at the 12th Armored Museum the weekend that it opens for the first time. This is Eugene W. Ryan. I'd like to know what year you were born, and then your full name, and the date of your birth, where you were born, and your full name.
Okay. Date of birth was August 7th, 1922. Full name is Eugene William Ryan. What else?
And where?
Rockford, Illinois.
Okay, tell me about your family history, what they did.
Okay, both parents are of Irish heritage. We were a big family. I had 5 sisters and 2 brothers. Both of my brothers became priests, and one of my sisters is a nun. She's still serving. She's 85 years old and still at it. And you know, those were tough times for everybody. So, and I went to school there in Rockford, and I graduated in 1940 from high school, and worked for a year to save some money and went to St. Joseph's College in Rensselaer, Indiana, for a little over a year and a half. And then I wanted to finish that spring semester out, so I hitchhiked down to Purdue University and enlisted in the reserves until they let me finish up through May, and I reported to Camp Grant, Illinois, Rockford, Illinois, on June 6, 1943.
So you had your college degree before you left?
No, I had 2 years.
2 years, okay.
Yeah.
And you were going, what degree were you working on?
Accounting.
Accounting, okay. So then tell us how you got from Illinois to California.
Okay, I was enlisted at Camp Grant, Illinois, and I was there 4 or 5 days indoctrination period, and then I got on the train and went to Camp Roberts, California, which is about halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles. It's a sandy desert area, okay. And was supposed to have been a 13-week infantry basic training. It turned out the conclusion of the 13 weeks, the logistics were not in place for them to know where they would send us. So we well, so we spent another 4 weeks there, so we had a full 17 weeks of infantry basic. And then the surprising thing that really happened was that we had, I guess maybe doing all Army maneuvers, they had a Red Army, Green Army battle, and in the process of that, a weapons carrier came around during the process of that, and I tried to stop them, and they told me they were looking for a guy by the name of Ryan. And I said, well, that's me. They said, well, jump in this. I said, no, the war's going on. I said, no, then you have to forget about that training nonsense. Get in here. You're going off to ASTP. I said, well, sounds great to me. Really? Shocking, you know. So we went back to some tent they had there, and they pulled out some forms that I must have filled out at some time earlier and asked me what I'd like to do, and I told them I was good at languages and I had studied accounting and this and that. So next thing I knew, I was turning in all my mosquito gear, which I had to go to the South Pacific, and I was...
You were headed to the South Pacific?
Yeah, we were at, I was beyond the camp, Roberts. I was at Fort Ord, point of debarkation in California. So just a great act of luck or something. Anyway, and then again, you know, the Army had so many people and trying to do so many things. They didn't know where. They just knew that I and lots of other guys were going to be in ASTP. They didn't have the openings in the university at that point in time, which was probably September, end of September, like this time of year, 1st of October. So they sent us a real nice place, Santa Rosa Junior College, Santa Rosa, California. It was fantastic, just gorgeous. Oh, I loved it. And all they did there, they really didn't have a specific program in place. They just gave us a lot of review of stuff I'd probably studied before with a snap. And that went on. And then each week they would post that there's an opening at, let's say, Texas Agriculture and Mining college. And I said, no, I'm not going to a school like that. And then they would post another school. And I said, no, I'm going to University of Illinois or University of Madison, Wisconsin, or Ohio, or something like that. And then what happened, you know, when you're young, you make mistakes. And I was supposed to have been on, like, fire guard week after week.
What's fire guard?
Well, they had nothing. It really is just you have a barracks. If the barracks was to catch on fire, you were supposed to put the fire out, okay? But it was just a ruse to keep you on the camp. So this one particular time, I said, oh, we're not staying here. Come on, we're leaving. Going into town. So we go into town, have a great old time. And, you know, I had a few beers and went into a roller skating rink and was having a super time. The guy I was with was really heavy and you know, not very agile. And while we were in there, he just couldn't skate worth a darn. He'd fallen down, bumping into people. And he's so big, he's knocking 4 people over instead of 1, okay? And then they told us to leave, and we weren't about to leave. So then they had to call the MPs, and then when they called the MPs, I knew it was time to go. You know, so I said, come on, Baker, you gotta move. Skated out in the middle of the street, pulling his 250 pounds with me, and hailed down the cab, jumped in the cab with the skates on and everything, and went out to the camp. And apparently there was a lieutenant who was a regular Army and very, you know, I think just rather insecure. He just kind of, you know, always being tough with everybody. You know, he didn't fight any wars. I don't know why he felt so tough. But so anyway, he saw us in town, and so we got back. We changed uniforms so that we're in our fatigues and we're standing fire guard. But Baker's sick, and I have to send him off to the training. And so the officer comes back. He said, Ryan, I saw you in town. I said, not me. Some other handsome guy, but not me. You did not see me in town. So where's Baker? I said, I don't know. I think he's sick. You know, he couldn't even leave the post. That's how sick he was. And well, he goes back and finds him up chucking all over the place, and we've been in town. So he told us that we're going to have to take a test every week. He's going to flush us out of there. Okay. Well, the tests were really fairly easy, so we'll take the test, and then they would post a notice for another school. And I wouldn't sign it, and then they kept taking tests. So then it dawned on them that somebody must be helping Baker or something. So instead of being able to take the test without supervision, we had to take it with supervision, and I couldn't help Baker, so then he flunked. And so then he went to, they sent him right away, Camp Carson, Colorado, mountain school. And the guy was too big for that. And he probably didn't have any agility, so he wrote to me and said, whatever you do, don't come here. And he told me a funny thing. To recognize how big he was, it was just so humorous to me that he had $300 doesn't sound like much today, but you know, $50 a month, $300 is a lot of money. So he wrote and he told me to put him on skis and send him down a mountain, and he crashed and just totally destroyed the radio, and they told me he got to pay $310 for a radio, you know, and he was saying, well, don't ever come here, okay. So there were some other, you know, pretty good officers there at the company. He said, one of them came to me and said, Ryan, you know, you're good, but nobody's perfect, and you're going to have to take a school. I said, no, I want to go to Indiana or Illinois or Wisconsin.
So you basically were just hanging.
Yeah, I was just taking the test. Yeah, kept turning them down right after, until one nice officer came to me and said, Gene, he really wants you, and he's going to get you. You're going to get a test the like of which you ain't never going to pass. And so I went and took a test, and it was tough. And I thought, boy, you guys right. So I left the work papers with the officer that gave me the test. He said, where are you going? I said, I'm going right over to the captain's office over there, and I'm signing whatever form is over there. That's what I'm doing. So that particular form was to go to State College of Agriculture and Mines at Las Cruces in Mexico. So that's where I went. And then that didn't last very long. See, by that time it was already January something. And I think about the first week of March or thereabouts, the government already made their mind up that they had 200,000 men in ASTP, and they were going to wind the war down and wouldn't need them, okay, in that position. So they ended the whole thing at one time all the way across the country.
How did you find that out? I mean, some people really resented that fact that it got closed down and stuff. How did you find out about it? And how did you feel about that you weren't going to be going to college?
Oh, I didn't really like that college all that well. I didn't want the engineering school. It was an engineering school. That wasn't a long suit for me. That's why when they got to the engineering test they were giving me, I began to struggle. You know, history or English or languages or, you know, I was a star, but I wasn't in engineering. Or economics or accounting or any of that, you know, that was easy. So, no, I had no, I just was naturally concerned. I wasn't apprehensive, I wasn't frightened or anything like that. I just wondered, you know, where am I going to go? I knew I had infantry basic training, so I figured they'd put me in the infantry someplace. And I didn't have any qualms about it, any reservations about it. And we went to, our only problem for me, and I discovered, after the war was over, I discovered there were people in the 12th Armored Division who disliked the guys who happened to be in the ASTP. I never felt any of that. Anybody I knew never treated, as far as I'm concerned, treated me any differently. And I certainly didn't feel I was superior to them or anything like that. I was just saying to myself, these guys have been at this ever since Tennessee. They're going to know their job a lot better than I know mine, so I better dig my toes in and find out what's going on, okay, and pay attention. So I had no problems at all. But I was surprised. I learned years later that some people thought the ASTP guys thought they were better than, and it must have been a mistake. They must have misunderstood. I just, I didn't get it.
Tell me about your first captain in Barclay.
First what?
Captain?
Yeah,
Sergeant?
Captain was Captain Haygood. Regular Army guy, really rather insecure. You know, he put on a big act all the time, you know, like stand out there with his watch. You know, it's so funny to me. looking at the time. All right, wind them up and turn them over. Wow, this guy, is he for real or what? And he was a lieutenant then, and Bill Kerr was a captain. Bill was a good guy. And to this day, he's a great guy. And then Bill got promoted to major, so he made Haygood captain. But that wasn't until after we got it. See, when I joined those guys, they were ready to go. You know, when I joined them in March, probably just waiting for the logistics to be put in place. That they had their training done. They were going. We didn't. Us ASTP guys just had to play catch up. That's all, you know. And then they recognized that there were a number of guys that had been in the Army a year or more and hadn't had a furlough yet. So then, I was one of them. So then they sent us home in July for a furlough. When we come back, we were packing everything up, and we left. I don't know, first week of September or something. So.
Were you in the signal company? Did they put you in the signal company?
Yeah, surprisingly. I was so lucky. They put me in the signal company.
Tell me how you got there.
I don't know how I got there. You know, it made no sense to me. I didn't think about the signal company. They said you're gonna be a radio operator. I said, no, I'm not interested in radio. I mean, I'm going to be a radio operator. I came over to fight the war. I'm an Irishman. I'm not some clerk or something. What? But he didn't have much to say about it, you know. So I said, I'm not operating radio. If you find out I can type or something, then I'll be stuck in some office. It's not going to happen. Okay. So then they said, we'll put you on a wire team. I said, that's fine. So I put on a wire team, and I climbed the poles and strung the wire and this and that, but somehow, I don't know how it happened. They said, did you ever drive a motorcycle? I said, no, but probably would be nothing to it. And then it took me and 4 or 5 other guys, and they said, you know, we made a mistake. We're not going to have motorcycles. Motorcycles out. We're going to have Jeeps. I said, no, that'd be great. So they turned us into messengers, which was a really interesting job, you know.
Tell me about it. Tell me all about that, being a messenger.
Well, we would, radios notwithstanding, there's several reasons why radios weren't used. Number one, I would surmise the Germans were so bloody smart that they, in America, maybe 1 out of 100 speak German. In Germany, 2 out of 3 speak English, okay? And so they could interpret any message you were sending by radio unless you were in code, and they were smart enough to figure the codes out as well. And then the radios were really substandard in terms of the equipment that's available today. Radio at very short range, and then when you got in the mountainous areas like the Vosges Mountains or down in Colmar Pocket, radios were enormously good. You had to send people with messages right up to combat commands to get messages delivered to them, And in armored divisions, unlike World War I, armored divisions move with some speed, and therefore the reason you gave your messenger a vehicle, a jeep, but moreover the maps were all terrible. Germans were much smarter than us when it comes to maps, I'm telling you that. But anyway, I'm not exaggerating. I had one map was 1883 or something. Okay, I'm sure the roads changed a little between 1883 and 1944. But but then where you were supposed to go, where Combat Command B was, where Combat Command C, they weren't there. And when you got there, because they moved on, then you don't know which direction they moved. And so you had some trepidations, you had some moments, that were interesting, but it was a unique spot. It really was.
So did you find yourself alone on the roads, driving from place to place?
Sometimes, not too often. More often than not, we traveled 2 guys in a jeep, and by about I would say by about end of January or the 1st of February, somewhere in there, we put wire cutters on the jeeps because the Germans were, they may, whether they knew they were fighting or losing the war, I don't know. But they would string a piece of barbed wire right across the road at about 36 inches high, just lop your head off. Jeep, we didn't have any tops on them like you see them sitting out here, and the windshield was on a hinge and on top of the hood of the engine, so you're really a pretty low silhouette. And that was the whole purpose of it, to be a low silhouette as possible. So then at that, they would string a barbed wire across there, and so we put a piece of angle iron up in a V shape to catch that wire and snap it. Particularly at night, so you drove without any lights at night. But it was interesting. It really was, lots of times. And we were never supposed to read a message, and I can understand, but even then I understood it. I didn't do it. Except one time, instead of going forward, I went backward, and they gave me a message to go back to some town that we had already been through. It was in France, someplace. And then it was just some stragglers of German soldiers who had maybe broken ranks with their own unit, and but I took some rifle fire anyway, and so I thought, gee, I got to find out what's in that message before I take any more risks. So I take this message. The message is from Major. I can't remember his name now. He was a judge down in Louisville, Kentucky. His name will come to me maybe. Anyway, the message was to some lady about his laundry that he had left there.
Oh, me. When you got your messages, what was the source of messages that came down the line? I mean, where did they start, and when did they come to you? And
now, we went to a message center and picked up the messages, and they were just handed to you. You had no idea who initiated. There was no names on them. You just take this to Combat Command B, or you take this to Combat Command A, or you take this to Combat Command C, or you take this to 92nd Recon, or you take this to the 872nd Tank Destroyer Battalion. And you didn't know any names, purposely. If you got caught if the message out, they didn't know who the message was to or who it was from. But or sometimes they would deliver. Gee, there was a lot. We must have had maybe 25, 30 messengers. And a lot of them, I didn't know who the wars were. I never saw them. There were some of them were 10, 12, 15 miles behind the lines, and that's where they were. They were doing typing, and they were shuffling this stuff around or whatever. And then there was a crew of, you don't know, Bill Cure would know if you talked to him. Probably about 15 of us had just kept running with messages all the time.
So you were you with the company, or was the signal company kind of just scattered?
It was scattered, yeah.
Okay.
Some of them were attached, like some of the signal guys were attached to a combat command, and they were primarily radio operators, and they would operate radios. And they had today's conversion van was a panel truck, and that's what that was. Then they put all the radio gear in, and.
So when did you start being a messenger? Right when y'all hit Le Havre and started across Europe, or?
Yeah.
Was?
Oh, I knew I was in. I knew that was my job. Still, while we were here at Abilene. And then we got over there. We sat in Tidworth Barracks in England for a while, I'm thinking about 6 weeks or something. And then we went to France, and we didn't know anything about the progress at that point, about the war, how deep the invasion had been made. We really didn't know anything about it. But we found it was pretty simple for us. And then we were not committed right away. When we got there, we were just in a holding area, and it was so cold in October and November. I'm thinking, maybe 3 weeks we didn't do anything. We just slept outside in that cold sleet and rain. It was terrible.
What was the first, do you remember the first message that you took?
No, I never knew the content of the message unless I opened it up and read it. But
So you were supposed to do that?
I was not supposed to ever read a
You were
message.
supposed to never.
Not ever read a message, no. For some reason, if you got caught, you knew what was in that message, and any adversary could extract the truth from you if you worked at it hard enough, So you didn't. But
Were they long distances or short, or what was
distance,
generally?
oh, not too far. 2 or 3 miles, maybe. Because we were close enough that we were getting strafed a lot. These were diehard, I would say, German pilots that would come in at dusk, 6 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock at night, and you couldn't hardly see them until they got, because they flew real low. So we were pretty close all the time to where we had to go. And then sometimes we would sit for a couple of days, not knowing if it was a matter of the logistics of the supply of them getting gas enough to the tanks to run with or what, because that happened particularly under Patton. He just ran you till you're out of gas.
How did y'all feel about Patton?
I didn't have any I liked when we were in the 7th Army under General Patch. He just, right or wrong, he just seemed to have a little more empathy for people.
You did?
Yeah, General Patch.
Patch. Okay.
Patch, not Patton. Patton was, well, what little I knew of him, he was just a gruff, rough rider like Teddy Roosevelt or something,
Tell me about Herlesheim. Where you were and what you did, and kind of the ins and outs of that.
Well, at Herlesheim, I wasn't, or any messenger was right into the fighting, unless it was a message that was telling them to pull out of there. But generally, the conditions which they were supposed to hold fast. Okay, so there wasn't any messages being brought in there, and but we're grossly over. It got little or no attention. Herdesheim got little or no attention in January of 1945 for the simple reason that the Battle of the Bulge got all the headlines in late December. But the Herdesheim attempted penetration was fashioned by the Germans after what they did in Belgium, and they came at us with a lot more than what we had. And I'm sure all the officers, we didn't, I'm sure all the officers who went through OCS training very probably became aware that Germans had better equipment than we did. We went over there thinking we're Americans, and we have the best equipment, but we didn't have it. You know, that 88 millimeter gun that they had was so accurate and so good that it was a very treacherous weapon.
What was it like? So y'all were behind the lines at Herdesheim.
Hmm?
What was it for the men of the 12th, who I guess sat back there? Were y'all aware of what was going on?
No. The only time, there was no communication. So all you know is you were bogged down. You didn't know how bad these guys had it up there. Okay. Nor how many of them had been captured. We weren't aware until we got to Heidenheim in May of the 350 odd guys that were captured. So.
Tell me what it sounds like.
What?
Like the days that Herdesheim was active or other battles. Tell me about the sounds you hear.
Well, you know, a railroad gun, it's got a 16-inch diameter shell, travel, I don't know, 6 or 8 miles. So you can hear the percussion of the shell. You can hear the destruction, you know, when it slams into a building. Like when we were at Colmar, that's a hilly region in the southeastern part of France. There were buildings that were probably 500 years old or older that had 3 and 4 foot stone walls, the whole basement, the whole house, and they took one over for headquarters. We didn't know at that point. There was, I think, 3 or 4 days we didn't have a thing to do, and we just would play chicken. We'd go up on the 3rd floor, where there was a lookout window to see if we could see any troops advancing, and we couldn't. But then we knew the timing of the railroad gun was about every 60 seconds. And we'd sit there and play chicken and see who's going downstairs first. Then we'd run downstairs, and then the 66th Armored and 56th had really broke that pocket open, and all we had to do was go up and deliver some messages up there. I never opened them, but presumably told them they were prepared to pull back because they were virtually the whole pocket had been secured in France. France's French First Army would take their positions, take it over, and fill in the gap, and then we'd go on, and that's what happened.
Do you mind telling me, this is always a real quandary about this, because part of history you want to know what happens and you want to know the truth and stuff like that, but then I know it's very difficult because then it brings back memories and things that you may not want to especially remember. So you have a right to tell me you don't want to talk about it. What was the closest time you ever felt that your life was in danger? Besides every day?
No, it wasn't every day. About for a messenger, it wasn't every day. It was probably the easiest part in the Army of being a messenger, unless you were cooking food back in some kitchen somewhere. But the first few times we got strafed, I just couldn't, you know. At one time I wondered, did any of these guys have as much, you know, infantry basic training as I had? And for a split second, I didn't think they did. Because the first time a plane came into strafed us, I ran up to a 6x6 truck that had a 30 caliber gun on it and tried to shoot the plane down. And
You did?
yeah. And that all I did was make everybody mad because I didn't really remember the trajectory parallelism of a gun when it's mounted, you know, and I was shooting a little too low. So somebody could have got hit with friendly fire or something, you know. So somebody was upset about it. But you know, driving at night, you know, a lot of times, you know, you hear the rifle fire, and that 9mm Mauser rifle was an excellent rifle. Those guys were good, so that was worrisome. That and the fact you had to drive by tree line, you know, and
Tell me about driving by a tree line. Explain that to us who have never done that.
well, if you have no lights on at all, and you have a little bit of moonlight, and you're driving, and if you observe there's trees on either side of the road, okay? So if you just say, this is simple, I can just zoom down there and follow these trees. Well, all of a sudden the road makes a turn and the trees are still there, you know.
Did you ever crash your Jeep?
No, when the war was over, I had a lot of fun with the Jeep when the war was over because, you know, a Ford Jeep and a Willys Jeep, either one of which maximum speed was like 61 miles an hour, 62 miles, absolute maximum speed. And I had an interesting job when the war was over. Since I spoke a little German, they asked me to go out and pick up this particular scientist or this physicist or what have you. Maybe he had worked on an atomic bomb or maybe, and intelligence wanted to interrogate him. So I would go out and pick them up and bring them back. And then in doing so, you know, maybe I'd go through another town that had MPs in it, and I hadn't gotten to my destination yet, and I'd be going too fast, and they'd come after me. So I'd just turn around and say, come on, and go, and they would go. No way they could catch me, you know. No way. It's so much fun.
Tell me where you were when you found out that you really realized that things were going to wind down.
That's a peculiar thing. I mean, really, we got to Austria, and we were, I guess, naive enough to perceive that this war wasn't going to be over till we got to Berlin. Okay, so we knew that the Germans were running out of benzene, as you call it, their fuel for their airplanes, because we would drive through a town, and we'd be told we're staying here, and then we'd talk to the German civilians, and we'd say, hey, wo ist der Luftwaffe? Where's your Air Force? They'd say, aber wir haben keine Benzin. We don't have any gasoline. I say, warum? Why not, right? America, the bomba, 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 and we blew up all their, yes. But we didn't really know. In fact, I had a very good friend. People of Italian heritage are basically very compassionate people. And I love this guy. He was great. He was with me all the time, practically all the time. And when I got sent out alone, he always got mad about it, you know, and concerned. And this, I didn't know it, I was probably carrying messages to both Combat's Command A and B to pull back. But I didn't know it was in the message. There's no reason for me to look at it. I was actually going in daytime. And this was like May 7th or something. So, Lavavo, wherever he had been, he comes back and he asks around. He always called me Patty just because I was Irish. And that's where Patty is. So they told me he went. He said, oh my God. So then he knew better than anybody that he was not to send a message in the English language at any time. No. So he went back to message center where they had a radio, And he told them they had to send a message to Combat Command A to see if Patty Ryan got there yet. And they got upset with him, even a tough little Italian. So they did it. And then he sent a message to Combat Command B. And so I wandered around through the woods for the longest time. There was a few state Germans around there, and I just kept a low profile as best I could. And I found Combat Command A, and I saw their OD painted panel truck with the electrical gear on it, so I knew that's where I wanted to go. And I got there, and the guy said, "Are you Patty Ryan?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, will you tell that dumb GD Italian to quit sending messages?" He said, "He's sending them in English, and he's yelling." And I said, "Well, that's the Volvo."
I don't think I'm
So when I got back, they told me it was all over. I got back on the 8th or 9th, and they told me the war was over. I couldn't believe it.
Was there a lot of rejoicing?
Oh yeah, we were really ecstatic. Really ecstatic.
Tell me how the Signal Battalion, how it interrelates with like the AIBs, the tank battalions. How did y'all intermingle with all that, and how did? Tell me about that.
I don't know as I could know that too well. We weren't up on line with the 56th or 66th Armored Infantry Battalion, and we didn't have any picture of, if a pincer is a V, and you got your infantry up front, and you got your tanks, about a third of the way back, and you got your artillery back at the end of the base of your triangle. When that starts to move, it's only going to move wherever the softness is in the enemy line, and they're going to, that's why when they do move here, it's hard to find. But there wasn't that kind of interplay. I think in the flat country, like you have here in Texas, why all the messages would have been sent by radio because they'd be received very well. It was, but. We didn't have much way of interpreting how well that was going with them. We really didn't.
Now, would you be with a certain battalion? Like there would be a lot of y'all, but y'all might be with a tank battalion, A, B, C.
No, they have a radio operator. Each one of those, he was a 152nd signal guy, assigned, okay? And then the messengers just ran up to try to find the radio station or company headquarters, the captain of the infantry at his company, or for reasons that in this day and age makes no sense, the blacks were not allowed to be in the infantry with the white infantrymen or anything else, okay? And then they developed a contingent of black soldiers that made up the whole entire 872nd Tank Destroyer Battalion. At one time I was supposed to deliver a message to to the 872nd, and I got about where I thought they were supposed to be, and I got out my Jeep and I was walking, and I heard click like an old 1903 rifles or ball ammunition, lock and load weapon, and he just pulled a hammer back and put one round in the chamber. And I wasn't surprised. I mean, if you were in guard duty, that's what you ought to do. But then I heard another one. And I heard another one. Man. So, one of them said, "What's the password?" And I told it to him. He said, "That's a wrong password." And with that accent, I knew he was a black soldier. I said, listen, you guys just don't understand me. You don't understand a guy that speaks English. Okay? So the fact that I've already heard 4 clicks, it means you guys are so frightened, 4 of you are standing guard duty together behind a tree someplace so you can come out because it's just me, okay? So they didn't like that, but they came out. And they hassled me a little bit. I told them I had a message for the captain, and they said they'd take it. I said, no, it doesn't work that way. I take it. So I got up there, and their commander was a white guy. So I told him, I said, your guys are kind of jittery out there. He said, we've been busier than you can believe. They got a right to be jittery. I said, well, okay. I said, but I never stood guard that way with 3 other guys helping me, okay? He said, well, you're just a messenger, so if you got a message for me, give me the message or something. So I said, okay. So I said, I'm going to tell you what, you can put your helmet on and you can walk with me. I'm going to walk about 1,000 yards. You can hear how many hammers I hear click, okay? He said, no, you're going to be all right. So then he called a guy in, or 2, and told them that, they're getting a little too nervous and to just settle down a little bit. But I'm sure they were good soldiers, and I'm sure they did a good job.
Tell me, what did you find out about yourself during this war? Some things that you might have known but just realized about yourself more, or things you just had never thought about, who you were and the makeup of who you were until you got to Europe?
Well, I think the exposure, provided the opportunity for me to be a lot more tolerant than I had been before I went in the Army. When you realize, you grow up in very cloistered type societies where you have some Irish and some Germans and some Polacks maybe, and not very many other people of other races. And except when I was a little kid, selling papers every day. Well, all poor kids had to do something. So if I had a corner, somebody had to come try and take my corner from me, and invariably it was a black guy bigger than me, or an Italian that was bigger than me. But it's only like in the war itself that I realized that these guys were equally as capable or more capable than I was. So I learned a lot more respect for them,
When you look over across your European experiences, is there one person that comes to your mind that you hold in high esteem and you respect a great deal for what he did or what?
Well, the guy I rode with was great, Al Lavavel, very steady, like when we were in the Vosges Mountains, and no army in the world in history, recorded history, ever penetrated the Vosges. Now, part of the Vosges is not unlike the Rockies in Colorado. And if you perceive taking a tank through them, or a Jeep, and then you add to the fact that it's December, but there was a guy that was very steady all the time. I don't care if all the wheels were spinning or we were turning around or the truck was sliding right into us or what. He just kept right at it. He was great.
So there was a lot of times when it was your own equipment and things like that that were as much danger to y'all as the enemy fire?
And I didn't experience much of that. No, I would say if you had been an armored infantryman, you had every reason to be considerably concerned and fearful of friendly fire. You know, for the simple reason that you're bound to get a little trigger happy. And at dusk, for example, when you can't clearly identify who may be coming at you or something, you might fire before you just ask, like, even to take the time to ask somebody what the password is. He can tell by your voice where you're at. If he can't see you risk getting shot at or something. So, that's pretty touchy, I think. But I don't have any of that. If I did, I crossed, I crossed lines only because I went out to run, not to run, I went out to find wherever I was supposed to be. And by the time I got back, maybe the 23rd Tank Battalion moved up. And then they didn't know who I was when I was coming. So I get out of the Jeep and crawl up to them. I don't know who I was.
So the signal company had a very unusual kind of situation that they had to face every day.
Yeah, see, you didn't hear much about a signal company in Vietnam. I wasn't in Vietnam, but you didn't hear much about one, and I would think the primary reason was they didn't have a broad enough front in which to run a battle or run a war to have all these different units deployed all around needing communication from one to the other so that the artillery wouldn't wind up killing their own infantry or so the tanks wouldn't wind up shooting 75 millimeter shells in the wrong direction or such as that. I think the channel was pretty narrow in Vietnam as to where they were going and very few single guys were involved in that war.
When y'all were going through Europe and you became the mystery division, did the amount of time you went back and forth, or did you just go quickly? Did you go quickly with the whole division?
Yeah, we went. We were sometimes we were simply on the move, just going, not knowing when we'd stop, just going. The poor Germans, they just eventually ran out of everything, and individual members of the Army have no idea what's happening to all their supplies and all their support groups and what have you. Because they wound up with 15, 16-year-old kids and 65-year-old grandpas fighting the war.
This is the Germans you're talking about, aren't
Yeah,
you?
yeah. So and when they ran out of gas and they had horse cavalry, and a gun on one of these tanks, you see sitting out here to just make hamburger out of that whole unit,
How did you feel about the German people?
Well, we weren't traumatized, but we were brainwashed really good. It's necessary, I'm not being critical, it's a necessary thing for your people to understand that they are it and they are number one and they are better than anybody and these guys are the worst things on the face of the earth. You have to have some bad feelings about somebody to want to kill them. You know what I mean? That's why I really wanted, I misunderstood the whole thing. As a kid, I thought I'm supposed to go to Japan because those guys are my size and I'll be punching the lights out of those guys. But it's not that way.
Did you ever come across any SS?
Yeah, you bet.
Tell me about them.
Well, this was after the war was over. I was sent out to where they think they might be, find them in bed, and take them in. and brought him in for interrogation and such as that. But it was like from May 10th to about a month, to about the 15th of June or so, till they thought we had them all rounded up. The officers and everybody went out after them guys. Bill Kerr himself went out after them. He was a colonel.
Now, when you drove at the end of the war and they were collecting people to come question them, were they treated, did you have to treat them as prisoners or as, I mean, how were they labeled? How were they treated? What was their position?
They were civilians in Germany, and they were very well educated, and they, you know, their families, they had grown up. The German government did an effective job of convincing their people that when these Americans come, you better kill every one of them because they're bad. They're going to rape your wives and kill your children, and they're going to do this and they're going to do that. Okay, and they had, by the time we saw them, they'd had so much of war, they had it right up to here. They hated everything that had to do with war. And they didn't trust anybody with a uniform on, and I understood that. So when I went to pick them up, you know, I wasn't very kind to the mayor because I didn't speak English or German that well. But when I had to go get somebody, I just went to the mayor of that town, to the Bürgermeister, and I'd tell him this guy's name and ask him where he was. He invariably would say, "Ich weiß nicht," which means I don't know. And I put my gun on him and say, you know, you want to live and eat dinner tonight, you know, you better tell me, okay? And I'd hustle him until he told me. And when he told me, I let him go. And I'd go find him. When I go find him, and the poor guy's wife would be just absolutely distraught. She just hadn't vision. This American soldier is taking my husband. I ain't never going to see him again, you know. And I hear her telling him that, and I would tell her, no. I'm going to return with him. Okay. I know 1 week. And then I bring him in, and he didn't trust me. I understood that. I just made sure he didn't have a weapon on him, and then put him in the Jeep and take him back. When I got the G5 intelligence, I told him, hey, I promised this guy's old lady she's going to be back in a week, and he better be back during the week. I'm going to come back here and get him from you and take him back there, okay, because she's crapping her britches, okay. So when he
you
come
did
back.
that?
Huh?
So you'd go back and...
Yeah, I go back, and they say, we're not done. I'm saying, oh, you better get in the Jeep and ride with me. That old lady is worrying her head off. She's on her knees praying, okay? So I get him back, and then if they wanted him bad enough, then they just took him to America, you know, the family. They took him first, though, and wound up taking the families later. They didn't take them all at one time. And the women, you know, had problems believing that, you know. But there was a lot of them. There was just so much concern that I think on a part of America that we might only been 90 days ahead of the Germans in developing the A-bomb. And they were afraid if anybody stayed there, the job would get completed and the war would only have been over temporarily, you know. So they had to hustle them, and they hustled them off to America, and then they brought the families back, brought the families to America, and I hope you all stayed here, you know, I don't know.
What areas have I failed to cover?
Hmm?
What areas have I failed to cover or ask you about that I don't know to even ask you?
Oh, golly, I don't know.
There's a question I always ask everybody before I quit because I think it's important. Unless you want to talk. Do you have another hour for talking to you?
I'm not talking for another hour.
Okay.
You're kidding me, right?
Yeah. When you look back at the war and how did it prepare you for the life after the war?
I don't really know how to answer that. I had a rather single-purpose attitude. I knew what I was going to do. I knew I was going right back home. I was going to either go right back to St. Joseph's College in Rensselaer, Indiana, and finish my education there, or I was going to go someplace else. And I knew I was going to be an accountant or an economist, one of the two, or maybe both. But you know, I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I went out and headed and did it. Yeah.
So what did you end up doing?
Well, things did change when I got in the workplace. When I got back, I just felt I was so old you know, because I was 24, 25, that I had to hurry everything up, and I changed my major from accounting to economics because I could get out a semester earlier or something, because I took some courses over in England when the war was over. When the war was over, you know, thousands of GIs were experiencing a great deal of cabin fever, and they were having fights and getting in trouble all the time, and because there was no Army routine to keep them in line. So they said, well, we got to set up some company schools and get everybody active. So they decided to send the officers to a university in Paris to learn how to set up company schools. And the officers didn't want to go. They said, Ryan, you have a good education, you go. That's okay. So I go, I'm the only non-com there, and anyway. Went to that school, come back, and I set up a school for welding, a school of carpentry, a school of bricklaying, cement making, finishing, stuff like that. And then everything about the schools came to me, and so I said, hey, first things first, I'm going to go to Oxford University, study law. Well, I couldn't get there. So I got to Strivenham University in Swindon, England, and I studied some cost accounting and some international economics and stuff like that for 3 months. And I came home with the 2nd Armored Division instead of with the 12th Armored Division. That was very interesting. And then I came home, went back to school, and went back to say, I didn't think I was going to go back there, because when I went there, and I think they had changed from a seminary to a college that had non-seminarian students there. They probably did that in about 1935 or 36, and so when I got there in 41, they still had some incredibly rules about where you went and what you did and how supervised study, and you know, didn't treat you like an adult. So I said, I'm never going back. So then I got word from guys on the bank said, it's all changed, we're having a great time, come on down. So I went down to have a little visit, and it had changed dramatically. So I went there and finished up in January of 48, and went up to University of Michigan to attempt to complete an MBA program, but I just plain ran out of money. I couldn't do it, so I quit. I went to work. And then worked in accounting for about 20 to 25 years, I guess. I was an auditor for 2 or 3 years, and then that company had a plant in Decatur, Illinois, an arms plant. We were making shells for Korea, and I worked as cost accountant for that. And then they transferred me to Buffalo, New York, their headquarters, and I worked as assistant corporate controller. But it was just a name. They're all young guys my age. I just saw I wasn't going to go anyplace, so I left them and went back to. Took a job in Illinois. I'd take us back to Illinois, and was controller of a company that made tungsten carbide cutting tools and such as that. Very interesting company. I worked with them for, 59 to 73, that's 14 years, and then the plant was really going to pot. And I was an accountant, I was forever trying to tell them what to do. So the president said, Ryan, you know so much about everything, why don't you run that plant? I said, why don't I run that plant? That's right, give me some money and I'm going to do it for you. And I did it. But then they sold it. So, you know, that was the first I heard and perceived about downsizing. They sold the plant to a company, a Mellon company in the banking business. They didn't know anything about running the business. Sent some 30-year-old kid down to tell me what to do. And it didn't work. I sent him back home. And his dad was a tough guy. His dad comes down, said, my son said that I should fire you. I said, if he felt that way, why didn't he fire me? He said, you busted his finger. I said, yeah, I did do that. I said, I'll tell you why. He stood out in front of the employee with his finger pounding on my chest, and I told him, don't do that, don't do that, don't do it. And, you know, I kept telling him, I just hurt, busted it. So, you know, I didn't help. So his dad come down and told me I really should look for a job someplace else. I said, no, you fire me and I'll sue you. That's what happened, okay? And then I thought, that's dumb, I better find another job. So I left him with another guy. I told the other company, don't you ever sell this company out from underneath me. I'm moving my family. If you do, you know, it's going to be bad news. And they did it anyway. 1 year with that company, I turned them around full circle. They were losing money hand over fist. 13 months I had them making money. They were so excited they sold it to a General Electric. General Electric was the first people that made tungsten carbide cutting tools, and they got the process from the Krupp family in Germany way back in 1933. But I left the accounting. I became a general manager, vice president, general manager of that company. That lasted a year, and I was VP and general manager of a company that manufactured roof coatings and caulks and sealants and adhesives and a whole bunch of stuff I know nothing about. But I just decided I'm not moving my family again. I'll sell it. I just won't be an accountant anymore. I'll just sell it. That's it. That's what I did. Worked out good.
I want to know if you were to have one last comment about people that are going to be seeing that tape, what would you say about the war, or what you would like them to know?
Oh boy. I guess the best thing I tell them that no matter what they may have read, it was unfortunately, undeniably necessary. It had to happen. Or their children, or they themselves, if they're younger, would be speaking either German or Japanese right now. So it had to happen. But Americans, I'm sure, were a lot better to the prisoners they took than the Germans were. Now that.
Were you a prisoner of war?
No.
You weren't.
No. No, I knew guys that were, though, and some of them got treated good, and some of them got treated terrible. Well, in Japanese, they all got treated terrible, I think.
Well, I appreciate your time today.
Hey, I appreciate
It's been
coming to
great.
talk to you.
I
Okay.
appreciate it.